Hello, hello. Thank you everyone for joining. Do say hello in the chat box. Today we have a wonderful webinar with Richard Ballard, the co-founder of Growing Underground. It's presented by the Peter Jones Foundation. We're an organisation dedicated to supporting young people through enterprise and entrepreneurship. I'll share our details at the end as well as Richard. So if you want to find out more, you can have a look. In today's webinar, we are going to hear how Richard started his entrepreneurial journey, his ups and downs along the way, and how with very little or sort of no farming experience, he created an amazing business that is changing the way that we grow and eat our food. So how the webinar is going to work is I'm going to hand over to Richard. He's going to talk through his slides, and then we invite you to ask questions throughout in the chat box or in the questions tab. And at the end of the session, we will come back to them and create a really interesting conversation. So thank you, everyone. And I'm going to hand over to Richard, but thank you for joining and do get involved. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks very much. And thank you very much to the Peter Jones Foundation for having me here today. And it's a pleasure to be speaking to you all. So I am Richard. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Growing Underground, which is a data-driven ag tech controlled environment farm, which repurposes redundant urban space. Our first site is underneath the streets of Clapham in London in a World War II air raid shelter, where we, which you can see in the picture behind me, we use hydroponics and LEDs to produce microgreens and baby leaf. We pack them on site. We ship them into New Covent Garden Market, which is less than a mile down the road from where we're based. And from there, our produce is distributed over the capital to hotels, restaurants, and retailers. We power the site by 100% renewable energy, and we're working towards carbon neutrality, which we should have achieved by the beginning of 2021. We also are working towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So this is a slightly different talk that I normally give. I will obviously be talking about Growing Underground, and I'll come back to that. But for the sake of this conversation, I am going to actually talk a little bit about some of my previous businesses, but what I've never done before. So the presentation is about 30 minutes, and as Katie said, I'll be available for a Q&A after. So my first. Oops, and I move the slide on.
Oh yeah, so just hover on the right, perfect.
I've got it. So my first business, well, I actually don't really remember this business, but apparently when I was very young, maybe about 5 years old, I got my dad to buy me a bag of balloons and then blow them up for me. And then I tried to sell them back to him for 10 pence each. This, was my first, as I said, I don't really remember it, but it was my first move into being running a business, I suppose, and my parents saw that I was going to be an entrepreneur from that day, I think, and go on and do my own thing. What did I learn from this business? I learned that it's not really that easy. I also learned my dad's not a mug, so he didn't buy them. But then, like a lot of people, I moved on to other businesses, and I did the lawns and the hedges for my local neighborhood. Yeah. What people did when they're younger, but then in my early teens, I was really into this. Is back in the early 90s. I was really into going clubbing and going out, and I set up a club night with a few friends in Bristol, and we got some really sort of well-known DJs in to do this, and it was a really good night, and it was my first sort of journey into running a business, a proper business. We also put a night on in Ibiza. We went there on holiday, and I saw that the fact, this was in '93, there was not many British club promoters in Ibiza in '93. And so we decided to do it in '94, the following year. When we did, everyone came out from the UK that year, and we were swamped. We weren't a very well-known name, so it didn't really work out. But we did a night that went reasonably well. What I actually learned from this is that it's really how important marketing is in business, and building a following, building a tribe. As I think it's Seth Godin says, in his book Tribe, which is you need to build that tribe. This was before social media as well, so it was a different world back there then, and it's much easier in some ways to do that now with social media, but obviously everyone's doing it, so you've got to really differentiate yourself and stand out, and marketing is really, really key. After that, I actually went traveling, and I went out to Australia for a working holiday, and I traveled around Southeast Asia. When I came back from that holiday, I arrived in Indonesia for a few months before I went back to the UK. And as I arrived, this was in '97, the sort of dictator Suharto that was in charge then was being overthrown by student protests on the street, and it was a difficult time over there. And while I was there, I made some connections with suppliers of furniture, suppliers of arts and crafts. And when I came back to the UK, I set about starting a business up in this with furniture. And I went to the Prince's Trust, actually. Who do a very similar thing to the Peter Jones Foundation, where they lend money. And I actually initially went to the bank, and the bank said, we won't be able to help you unless you had some support somewhere else. So I went to the Prince's Trust. I put a business plan together. They agreed to give me £3,000, and the bank, I went back to the bank, they matched the £3,000, and then I got an overdraft for £2,000, and I bought my first container of furniture. And it was shipped into the UK, and it wasn't as good as I had seen when I was originally out there. So there's a lot of fixing furniture in my dad's garage. I was only in my early 20s, and my uncle sort of helped out with this. He was a bit of a dab hand with, and we fixed up all these chairs. We sold them, and it went very well. I started doing these county shows that around the country, and I made enough money to buy another container, and that escalated. Eventually, sort of 10 years on, I did the business for 9 or 10 years. I was bringing in about 30 containers into the country per year, excuse me. This business really led me to sustainability. And what I learned from this business, I used to come back and talk to a lot of customers at shows who would ask about the traceability of the timber. And it was grown on, it came from plantations in Indonesia. It was set up by the Dutch some 100 or so years ago. But there was also other political issues around Burmese teak and other sources of teak that had political issues. And so this led me in the journey of researching this, and as well as reading things like Naomi Klein's No Logo, and how poorly some countries treat staff, and this was around when people were earning very low for wages for working. So it really led me to look at that, and the ethics around who I was working with. It led me to use better factories for producing products and getting a better quality product, and that all evolved over that time. I ended up being the first person to bring an FSC certified teak wood from a recycled source product into the UK. And it was a reasonably successful business that I employed about 9 people. The turnover at its maximum was just under £1 million. And, in my sort of late 20s, I think it was, reasonably successful. In 2008, the crash happened, and unfortunately, the business was quite cash rich in the summer with selling garden furniture, and then cash poor in the winter because you had to buy a lot of your stock in prior to it coming in the following year. And the bank used to support me with that, but then 2008 there was no support, and it was all turned off. So I was forced to put it into liquidation, which was a really interesting time for me. And in hindsight, looking back, it was a really positive time, because I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if that hadn't happened. At the time, it was like the end of the world. Everything's been just you're disappearing around you. So
the rug ripped from under your feet.
Sorry.
The rug ripped from under your feet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and but then you get back on your feet, and you sort of dust yourself down and move on. So I ended up moving to London to embark on a film degree, which is something I wanted to do when I was younger. And you know, I had enough of the business for a while and wanted to do something a bit creative, I think, and much to the amusement of my friends who thought I was having a midlife crisis, and I think I probably was. So and when I arrived in the capital, like a lot of people, I was really fascinated with what was going on underneath my feet. You know, the Crossrail was being built at the time. There was a lot of history underground, and you know, as Londoners, we're all fascinated with anything underground, I think. So that sort of made me aware of the tunnels, really, that we're working in now. And you know, I used to look at an idea for a film around the people that used to, urban explorers that break into these spaces and take pictures with a face covering on, and you'd see all these unusual spaces that you wouldn't normally see online. So that was quite interesting. But then towards the end of my degree, I made a documentary about the future of cities, how we're going to feed and power future cities with a growing population. And you know, there was figures coming out from the UN that there's going to be an extra 2 billion people on the planet in the next 30 years. And you know, how are we going to feed and power feed those people and power those cities, and with a trend of, you know, 80% of people living in cities in the next 30 years. That was so this led me to two interesting characters. The first is a guy called Jeremy Rifkin, who is an economist by trade. He teaches at the Wharton Business School in Massachusetts in the States. He's written about 20 books. He's an environmentalist. He's an activist. He also advises heads of state in Europe, people like Angela Merkel. So he's a very credible guy. He came up with the concept back in the early part of this last decade of the third industrial revolution, which is really about pushing the renewables industry and building large commercial renewable projects as well as community projects, but all using the new technology, feeding that into smart grids, using the Internet of Things, and using that very efficiently, and eventually getting to a stage where you maybe have a very, very cheap energy system, or if not free, which seems quite bizarre at this stage. But if you go back to the beginning of the 90s, you know, we would never have believed that we would have had a free information system in the internet back then. So that is, I think, possible. And also, a lot of the big tech giants have created energy companies, and maybe in the future you'll get free energy for releasing your data, and you know, we'll see how that evolves. But this is key to vertical farming, this energy, because energy is one of the biggest costs in that we have to pay with along with labor. So that was really and one of the sort of catalysts that really got me on that route. Also, China adopted Jeremy Rifkin's sort of third industrial revolution idea and invested in about 84 billion in infrastructure back in 2012, and he was a consultant to the Chinese government, so they took it quite seriously. Also, as well as that, I looked at how we're going to feed future cities, and this led me to a guy called Dixon Despommier, the guy on the right here, who came up with the concept of a vertical farm with a class in Columbia University in the early noughties. And they were looking at the fact that agriculture is responsible for 30% of carbon emissions in the world, and how are they going to, you know, mitigate that and reduce that? And they looked at bringing the production of this production of growing closer to the point of consumption, and then using waste streams like energy, CO2 for enrichment, which helps with growing crops, together. And you know, they were looking at, I mean, this was in the early noughties, before LEDs really were invented. They were looking at using mirrors and reflecting that in, and it was a whole sort of concept at this stage. And then architectural students got onto this and started designing the images and the renders that you'll see online if you type in vertical farms, which are really futuristic and out there. And I think that really inspired a generation of urban vertical farm, controlled environment agriculture, whatever you'd like to call it, entrepreneurs like myself, Steve, my business partner, and various other people around the world. So we then decided, after finishing my studies, moving on, myself and Steve got together, and we used to talk about a lot of businesses and running ideas past each other. He wanted to get out of the business he was in, and we decided to embark on this as a business. So first of all, we looked at space above ground, and we thought that even though this was just after the financial crash, we may be able to find something reasonable. But the property price in London is really high, and it needs to be close. So we then looked at this idea of underground space, and LEDs are sort of advanced in technology, and it was possible to grow a large amount of product in a small space. So one of the first sites we looked at was actually underneath the streets of the city of London, underneath Holborn, which was the former MI6 communications hub between the former Soviet Union and the USA during the Cold War, totally classified until the 1990s, and very difficult to gain access to. In fact, I never gained access to it, but I managed to get some plans and a price per square foot. And we did some calculations, and we thought this could potentially work. So, and then around this time, we also started looking at other sites, and we came across the sites at Clapham. And the ideal site for Clapham was that it was just very close to the major New Covent Garden market, which is the main hub for distributing food over the capital. And it was owned by TfL, Transport for London. They were intrigued with our idea, and they showed us the site, and then they decided to let us have the keys and get in there to do a trial. So we signed a basic contract. They gave us the keys, and hey presto, we had ourselves a tunnel. This is my business partner, Steve, tending to our first crop. So we actually bought a bit of kit just to try it out in the tunnel to see if it would work. And got a couple of lights. And this is not the tunnel we're in now. This is the tunnel next door, which is actually Clapham North, which was it hasn't been used since the war, and it's pretty run down, very little electric. So we would go down, unlock this padlock door at the top, go in and down 180 stairs with, one of these like torches on our heads, carrying all the stuff that we needed to do to go into this space. And we got downstairs. There was, tube trains traveling 4 stories above you, which is bizarre in itself, as well as old ventilation units making funny noises, big long tunnels where your eyes would play tricks on you. You think you would see something moving at the end occasionally, and we used to sort of wind each other up a little bit that maybe somebody was living down there. So we built this first unit. We got some good success from growing this product, and we decided to scale this up to, and we invested in a bigger system. So we went on to the second phase of our growing system, and this was a full hydroponic system, automated system, which we used to do seed trials, seed density trials, yield trials, and we also used the space to try and attract investment. In those early days, we spoke to banks. They weren't lending really. They still aren't. This was also a new industry, and investors, I think, were a little bit skeptical of two Bristolians in a World War II air shelter trying to raise large sums of money to grow produce. But luckily, around this time, crowdfunding sort of started really to sort of gain momentum. And we ended up doing a crowdfunding campaign. We got a massive press interest and following. We were in press all over the world, and had the likes of on the opening day, or when we actually launched the press, we had the BBC, ITN, London News. I mean, it's just we were doing press for probably 3 months, 3 days a week, and we just got masses of coverage, and this really helped the campaign and get that tribe behind us and get the following and investment in the business, which we ended up raising £650,000 in the round. In the first round, we went back for an additional 250 the following year. And around this sort of time, just before we actually started doing the crowdfunding, Steve came in full time then, but before that I was running the business myself, and Steve was working part time. And I went down to the tunnel one day, and the padlock that we used to go in was not on there, and the door was wide open. And I went down into the tunnel a little bit scared, actually, going in there with not knowing what I was going to find. When I got downstairs, things weren't in the same places where I had left them before, and this area was at the far end of a long tunnel, very similar to what I showed you before. And this had a curtain in front of it, and there was a big pink hue behind it from the lights. And when I got into the tunnel, I was walking along, I was met with this message which said, do not go beyond here, this is my home. Well, fearing serial killers, I got the hell out of there. So I ran up the stairs faster than I ever had before. Out of breath at the top, I called Steve and said, look, we've got a problem. And he said, you need to call the police. So I called the police, and they came down and they said, you're growing what in a tunnel? So I obviously had to give them a tour and show that we weren't growing anything untoward. And we never found out actually who did this. We put this down to urban explorers with a dark sense of humor. They could have just signed their name, but this played on our fears from before. As I said, we used to wind each other up when we used to go into the tunnel. One thing I didn't mention before we went into the tunnel, when we broke it into shifts to check on it in the early days, we used to have this sort of thing where we'd ring each other and say, look, I'm going into the tunnel. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, call out a search party, because if you fell over down there and nobody knew you were there, you could run into difficulty. So after this, we actually employed our first employee, a guy called Jordan, an intern from Harper Adams University, who was a big lad and was there to sort of support me and help me out just in case we came across anyone in the tunnel again. But that was in the early days. So that all happened around sort of 2013, 2014. We did the crowdfunding campaign. And then we built the farm that we have today, and we moved to Clapham Common site, which was much more up together. It had a loading bay, a lift, office, toilets, which wasn't in the previous structure. It was much more up together as a tunnel as well, so more infrastructure. And then we took an investment from a company called G's Fresh, who are one of the largest salad producers in Europe, based in Cambridgeshire, and they really helped us with getting our accreditations to be able to supply into the major retailers. So things like BRC accreditation, M&S Field to Fork, Red Tractor, we put all these in place so that we could supply into that market. And then we started supplying to New Covent Garden Market in 2016, and then 2017 we started supplying to retail like Ocado, Waitrose, Marks and Spencer's, and Tesco's. We've done a couple of seasons with Tesco's over the last year, a couple of summer seasons. And at our peak, from the 500 square meters of growing space that we currently have, we were supplying up to 550 retailers around the country. Our peak in the summer, because Tesco's is a seasonal thing, and up to about 300 restaurants through food service, through people like Reynolds, and our own distribution into New Covent Garden Market. So a huge amount of restaurants and retailers from a small space. And as I said, that's what it's what's very good about hydroponics and controlled environment agriculture. And these are some of the products we supply. This is our retail range. We also have a food service range that are single products, but these are mixes of pea shoots with several microgreens that we blend into. So, for example, you've got a Japanese mix, which has got a wasabi mustard and a pink stem radish, which is quite fiery and hot, or you've got an English mix, which has got mustards and broccoli, and they're all really highly nutritious. Microgreens are very high in nutrition. You're basically eating lots of very small plants that have lots of nutrition compacted into them, and you can tell that by the flavor. The flavors are really intense. So that's our product range. Whoops, some more there. Okay, so I'm just gonna tell you a bit about the site. A lot of people ask about the site. It's an unusual space. So it's 2 tunnels that are half a kilometer in length. The tunnels were built between 1940 and 1942. They're a family of 7 deep level shelters that stretch from Belsize Park in the north of London all the way through to Clapham South in the south. They had this amazing foresight when they built them, and they plan to link them up and have an express and northern line after the war, but they didn't have the money, so that never happened. But each one is 65,000 square feet, around about that sort of size, and they're designed to house 8,000 people during the war. So great ventilation system, and just an amazing structure, and amazing that they were built in such short time. They are like a round tunnel, which you'll see just coming up now, which has a mezzanine floor that goes through the middle. And we use the top level for growing for the farm, and then we use the lower levels for water tanks, pumps, and utilities and walkways. So it works really well as a site for what we're doing. I'm just going to move that on. If you could move that on, Katie, to the next slide. Next one again. Oh, can I do it from here? No.
Give me 1 minute.
No worries. So the slide you're going to see now is basically just a 3D render of the space, and it just shows the lift shaft, the 2 lift shafts with a double helix staircase that wraps around each shaft, and then the lift shafts in the center, and then the ventilation that comes down into this sort of large space.
So we just got a couple.
No worries.
But that's incredible. I mean, with your with the tunnels underground, how does it work with TfL? Is it a long-term lease? Or... Yeah,
we've got a 20-year lease with TfL. What really works about the site is it's just over £1 per square foot, so that makes it really affordable. Yeah, exactly. You know, and it's also the fact that it's underground. We have a consistent temperature year round. So whether it's -4 degrees outside or 35 degrees, we have this consistent temperature of about 13 to 15 degrees. Using the LEDs that we have, that actually adds some temperature, some heat to the tunnels, which takes us up to to a higher temperature. And then with air movement, the ventilation system and air movement within the tunnels, we can bring that down to the perfect temperature. It's around 23 to 25 degrees for the crops we're growing. So we don't need like an HVAC system for that site, which is quite an expensive bit of kit and uses a lot of energy. So we're actually quite thanks, Katie. We're actually quite have a good use of energy, or a reasonable use of it. Even though we're using LEDs to grow, the LEDs are very efficient. So what a lot of people don't think about when you're growing produce that would normally grow in a warmer climate, that you have to either heat that environment in a greenhouse or in a controlled environment agriculture, and that costs money. So that's one of the real benefits of the site. Now, when we started this business, any business really starting today really needs to think about its impact on the environment, and this was really one of the drivers for us when we set the business up. And the 3 biggest contributors to carbon emissions in the world is buildings and the energy required to power them, and agriculture being the second, and the third being transportation. So we use redundant space, and we power the site entirely by renewable energy, 100% renewable energy coming from a company called Good Energy. Then with agriculture, we use resource-saving systems. So, for example, our irrigation system is a recirculating water system, which can use 70% less water than conventional agriculture. Some of the technologies we're looking at as well, which aeroponics, is even less water used. So very water efficient as a rule. Then also we use for our substrate, we use a recycled carpet, which is kind of like how you grow cress on
kitchen towel.
The kitchen towel when you're at school. So it's very similar to that. So but we use a recycled carpet, which is had a use already. So we're trying to use a circular economy sort of systems. And then also we don't use any pesticides on our products. Then with transportation, obviously we're growing very close to the point of consumption, which reduces food miles, pollution, distribution models, and we're not importing food from the other side of the planet, so we actually give our customers a longer shelf life. So that really reduces food waste in the long term. So many benefits to growing and using this sort of technology. One of the examples we like to give is pea shoots. We grow pea shoots, which if you were to grow these outside in the UK or in the Northern Hemisphere, you may get 3 or 4 harvests a year. But in a greenhouse, you can get up to 30 to 34 harvests a year. But in our farm, we're getting 64 harvests a year. So it's a real, you're basically giving the plants everything they need to grow. You're giving them a perfect climate every day. With the right amount of sun in the lights and the light of, so they can, achieve perfect sort of photosynthesis, and you get a consistency year round, which is really good for supply. The future, I mean, there's a lot of issues, that we're facing. Obviously, currently the global pandemic, Brexit, environmental climate change. The UK imports 40% of its fresh produce into the UK every year. The UN has predicted that we only have as little as 40 harvests left in some areas due to soil degradation and intensive farming practices. So there are some major problems in the world that need to be addressed. And I don't know if anyone saw the recent David Attenborough documentary on a life on our planet on Netflix. Highly recommend it. It was really, really good documentary. He actually states vertical farming as being one of the solutions, and which is a really good endorsement in the fact that growing large amounts of produce in a small space, intensifying yields and growing products like that, when you've got an extra 2 billion people expected on the planet in the next 30 years, it's not just that you've got to think about the agricultural space that needs to feed those people. There's definitely some efficiencies we can make around food waste. That could be an easy quick fix. But we need to, well, not really a quick fix, but it's certainly something that can be worked on. But you do need that extra space if you're going to continue growing in the conventional space. And what vertical farming allows you to do is grow that intensive yields in a small space, and then that allows current land to replenish and go back to its natural form, which is really good for the environment, for CO2 enrichment, and also for the fact that places like the Amazon rainforest are being destroyed daily for example, for soybean production. Yeah. And that could be potentially, we're talking way in the future, but in the next 15 to 20 plus years, you may see that the fact we're doing those staple crops in this way that will enable us to sort of not destroy current land, and that's really what the documentary was getting at. I mean, for us as a business, the future for us, we're currently doing microgreens and baby leaf, and the future will be heads of lettuce, moving into other fresh produce. And it all depends on the price of food. I mean, this works in places like Iceland or Japan, where the cost of food is much higher. You can start growing heads of lettuce and probably strawberries, tomatoes, and various other things in those environments much more. It'd be much more competitive and with the conventional system. Whereas in the UK, we're one of the sixth cheapest in the world for food. So it's a really difficult and competitive market for food. So if we can make it work here, we can make it work anywhere. Yeah. And our plan is to scale up as the technology becomes available into new products. And our imminent plans are to double our growing capacity and scale that model and make it very highly automated, and also using renewable power, but maybe on sites that have that power, and we can reduce the transmission and lock straight into that power source, so reducing our energy cost as well, because that's key until we get to as the technology evolves and just generally technology evolves. So that's our plans, and I'm available for questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, so I'll start. We've got lots of questions, but I think what is worth saying is that as the world changes, there's more opportunity, isn't there? So, what you did was seen as kind of very radical, and it still is seen as very radical. But as we're getting these calls for, a new economy focused on greener production, doing what you do has, enormous scope for growth.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it's the industry is really embryonic, and it's in the early days. LEDs are, somebody compared LEDs to being the stage of where mainframe computers were in the sort of 60s and 70s. So if that is the case, you can see the exponential growth in Moore's law and the processing power of computers is just escalated since then, in those 60 years. So, you can imagine where we can go with that.
Yeah, amazing. So I'm going to start on the questions. And this is one from Bill. So he said, you mentioned tribes and no logo. It sounds like you're someone who really immerses yourself in the world of business and entrepreneurship. Do you have any other book recommendations, networks, learning materials, blogs, podcasts that you recommend for kind of people looking to get into that world of business, be inspired by sort of other leaders in the field?
Yeah, great. Good question. I've got books. So I'd start with what got me into this, and I mentioned Jeremy Rifkin before. He's a really good author. There are 3 books. He's written 21 books, I think now. But there's 3 books that I would really highly recommend. One's called The Empathic Revolution. Empathic Civilization, I think it's called. And then the next one is The Third Industrial Revolution. And then the next one is Zero Marginal Cost Society. I think I may have had that first book name wrong. So it's the book that came before The Third Industrial Revolution. Those 3 books are really good, and they're still very valid today. He's really ahead of his time. That concept. When I made the film, I made a film about it was predominantly about the energy. I didn't make it about the food in the end because it was just too big a scope. So I made it about Jeremy Rifkin, and I had some communication with him in his office in the States and got an interview with him. When my film came out and I finished my degree, I brought the film out. It was on his Third Industrial Revolution concept was on the front of The Economist that month that I graduated. So I thought, yeah, I've hit something. I've really hit the zeitgeist there. So what else? Reading wise, just read a really good book called Citopia by Carolyn Steele about food and the future of society based around food, which is an excellent book. Podcasts. There's one. I listen to. I'm a big fan of Russell Brand and Tim Ferriss. And there's one called Future Thinkers, which is really, really good, and they have some amazing different speakers on there. What else?
So their podcasts as well, which are more about mindset and hearing from people from very diverse fields about how they're successful in different parts of their lives, aren't they?
Yeah. I think mindset's a good term to use for entrepreneurs and business. It's you really have to get yourself into that mindset, and you can. I mean, it's a learned thing, and you've got to be. I think we were talking yesterday, Katie, about the sort of sometimes sort of that off the back of that, inexperience and naivety around business is sometimes really a good thing. But I mean, if we had known what we know about this industry, or about food production before we'd started this business, we probably wouldn't have got into it, because it's a minefield, and that would just scare you. So sometimes that when you get into something, it's good not to. That inexperience, that naivety is really good, but then you need to get yourself into that mindset eventually. And and that what I mentioned in my business, my Made on Earth, the furniture business, when that actually went under, and it was I was very stressed back then, and I had a different outlook on life, and everything was quite material. I was doing the business to earn more money, to buy a bigger house and a bigger something or a bigger car. And then that all went, and it changed my mindset on my outlook on life and what was important. And also going through that experience of having, and I wouldn't say I had everything, but it was quite, but having, you know, a reasonably comfortable life and then it being taken away from you, and then being able to continue and get on and continue and build, you know, on something else and a new direction, you know, that's a really good learner and a really good lesson to be learned in life. And I really sort of have fond memories of that time and what came out of it. But yeah, I mean, now, you know, business is always stressful. There's always times of worry and strain. And I think, you know, keeping a good exercise regime, a good, I meditate daily, and, you know, and just trying to keep your mind focused and clear. And I think it was really good to find time for strategy of your business. You could be you could be a busy fool sometimes and running after, you know, chasing your tail. But I think you need to take time out to really think about strategy and where you're going in the direction. Yeah.
And I think when you talk about business strategy, because we had some questions about that for you, and about the kind of how the sustainable development goals plays into your business strategy, and does it underpin it, or does it sort of form a holistic part of the overall process? But when you started growing underground, did you envisage you were going to be here, or has your strategy changed and evolved multiple times?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, we're constantly evolving strategies for, you know, from so many different areas. It's I mean, we've initially, I think we started off to supply pretty much just the food service market in London. We saw that as big enough, you know, 8 million people in the capital. That's a massive market. But then, you know, we went in a direction of retail like the product. So then we went in that direction. And, you know, so our strategies changed there. One of the things we're looking at now is our second site being outside of the city, closer to the distribution. So we supply the retail and all the distribution centres from that site. And then we use Growing Underground for supplying into London and just purely for the London market. So that's a big strategy change. And lots of sub strategies all the way along there. Just to answer your question about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, when we started the business, this was in 2012. I think the SDGs came out in 2015. So, you know, we were, and like a lot of people, you know, we're aligned with those sort of ways of doing business, and those ways of what we need to do to change the way we do things on the planet. We're there anyway. So it was, and you've really got, I think I said it in the talk, you know, any business starting today, I'm sure you're all thinking the same, it's got to have these environmental and social credentials to move forward. It's just, that's the only way forward.
Absolutely. And what we see from a lot of people who are starting their businesses with the help of their foundation is that they have got a social impact. You know, they're for-profit businesses, but that purpose to create a better world, or to at least not create a worse world, is kind of central to the business propositions. And I think that, you know, with investors coming in and banks, people are being held to account more now as kind of companies and founders than they ever have been before, about what their business is doing and how it's impacting the world. Yeah. So we've got some. This is one of my favourites. But what is, from Damien, what is required to grow tomatoes versus green leaves, sort of underground? You know, can you pivot from the sort of micro herbs to exactly fruits and vegetables?
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, you can grow anything, you know, hydroponically, and you know, and most of the tomatoes you eat today are grown hydroponically, but they're probably grown, you know, in Holland in a greenhouse with LEDs as supplementary lighting, and using the, you know, the benefit of the sun, which is, you know, the way to do it with you know, with crops that require longer growth times, you know, but you know, the Dutch are very good at that, and it's just down to timing really for us. You know, when we're growing in this controlled environment, it's about balancing that energy and the requirement for energy, and you know, as the technology evolves, it will be possible to grow things like tomatoes and various other products that but at the moment it's just not commercially viable. Certainly in the UK, and I may say that, and it may work perfectly well in somewhere like Japan or Iceland, where I use those two examples because I know the price of fresh produce is much higher. And you also look around. There's trends in countries like, I'll use China and Japan as an example. So people in those countries are buying more and more produce from farms that controlled environment agriculture because of concerns, certainly in Japan, concerns around locally grown produce with Fukushima and what's happened over there. Also in China, with the soil has been really destroyed over there by chemicals, and people conscious about what they eat, and they realize that this is a very clean way of eating. So and it's possible to enhance nutrition with this type of growing. So there's a huge amount of benefits to doing it the way we do it.
Yeah. And then this is another question from Damien. So how do you compare with your US competitors, Plenty, Aerofarms, etc., in terms of the technology used? So automation, AI.
Yeah. So we compare very differently on the amount of money they're raising. So they've raised about 300 million, I think, all of them, in that sort of scope. And we've raised about 3.2 million, I think. So we're 1% of what they've raised. I think what we've achieved with the amount of money we've raised and the time we've been going is enormous in comparison. But how do we compare? So our current production system is quite manual, and we harvest with a knife, and we move things around within the tunnel, so it's quite labor intensive. And really, growing underground is a commercial scale prototype. So we proved the model that we can do it. There's a lot more to actually just the processes than just the automation. There's the operational know-how, the abilities to the microbiological sort of results and pathogens you've got to keep an eye on and check on. But how do we compare? So we've got 5 years of commercial data that we have recipes now for a wide variety of products that we now so we've increased our yields by 50% in some cases, and reduced growing days by sort of 30%. So which is key to the cost of what you're producing. And we have various data points from temperature, humidity, CO2, oxygenation in the water, CO2 enrichment, temperature of the water, pH, EC, all this data that creates the perfect recipe for growing certain things. So we feel we're very good at growing what we grow, and operationally. So the next phase for us now is we know how to do it, and the next stage is to raise. We're about to go into an investment round now, which will automate our line, and the main thing is with automation. A lot of it's off the shelf. I mean, the growing system is. We've got a plan. We've got a design of a system which is basically seeded at one end, product out at the other end. Yeah. Half of our production line is packing. And that's off the shelf. You can buy that, and have a very highly automated packing line, which is the bulk of our labor. The growing sides, there's not so much, but there are still elements. So are we there yet? No, but are we going to be there in the next 6 months? Yeah.
Yeah. And when you sort of talking a bit about funding, and you're going through another round of funding now, you obviously crowdfunded at the beginning of your campaign, had a really successful campaign. You've, in your previous business, you went to kind of for Prince's Trust loan and sort of bank loan. What do you think are the benefits and restrictions of each? And do they have different places for an entrepreneur at different stages of their journey?
Yeah, I mean, I had with my first business, Made on Earth, I had 100% of nothing in the end, because it was it didn't work. Mm-hmm. So and now I've got a smaller percentage of something bigger. So, and the support and help from bringing in investors to bringing in a bigger team, it is really beneficial. But there is still an attraction of that if you can maintain control of your business and build a business up, from a small amount of money loan and or investment from yourself or from somebody else, and build that out to something large. I mean, there's pros and cons of both sides of it. It's quite lonely actually when you're on your own. My business before was, I was on my own, and although you've got help around you, it comes down to you. Every decision's down to you. Where having a business partner is really good, because you can just bounce ideas off each other, and it's not always your decision. So
that actually takes us really nicely to Diana's question, which is, finding the right partner or partners is important. What advice would you give to someone about getting this right? Because you hear stories, from some of the biggest companies in the world to small companies, about friends, your best friends who go into business together, and it all falls apart. So how do you make that decision?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the sort of criteria that investors, VCs look at when they come into a company. And I think it's a really difficult thing, and I was lucky in respect with Steve that we knew each other from when we were about 11 years old. So I knew his sort of history. In fact, my mum and his dad used to work together in the bank, which is back in Bristol. So but yeah, I mean, there's no right answer to this. That most people probably aren't going to be starting a business with somebody that they know from when they're younger, and they're going to be starting a business with somebody they've met recently. And I don't know, it's just one of those things. You need to find somebody that you feel you can work with. Obviously those things can change, but it's I mean, you also need to find someone really, because that likes doing the things you don't doing. Like, you're not
complementary skills.
Exactly. Yeah. Once you're into the flow of running a business, you've got a vision and a mission for that business. And I think if you're both behind that, or as a team, you're all behind that, and you can still strive for that, irrespective of any differences you come across. This is the best way forward. Also, I mean, I think if you're starting out with somebody, it's really good to split the business down the middle and have it fair and equal from the start, depending on, otherwise that divide probably can cause problems in the future if you set it out and say, well, I came up with the idea, so I'm going to have
80%. Yeah.
So
to have some beef in the business.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great question from Elliot. It's great to hear your story from the initial idea to where you are now. What are your growth plans for the next 5 years? And I think we've touched on this a bit about the evolution of vertical farming and expanding to a site out of London. But any other plans?
Yeah, I mean, so the plan is to scale up in the next sort of 3 years. I mean, 5 years is we've done a 3-year sort of expansion sort of plan, and the plan is to scale the business, scale our product range, continuing with our mixes into retail, continuing our supply into food service. We're also putting in place a ready-to-eat product for next year. So currently our product is wash before use. So it'll be a bag salad that will be ready to eat, which opens your scope out to a much wider audience, both in retail and food service. So we're developing that, and we plan on building out our capacity to grow and supply, as well as working with partners to scale. Now, when I say that, there's a lot of people that sell technology in this industry. We don't necessarily sell technology, but we would build and operate farms with a partner, specifically partners that have a customer. So yeah, that's our strategy, as opposed to there's lots of people that are supplying containers and R&D facilities or offering to build farms, and that's not really our model. But it sort of is our model in the fact that we would do it, but we would do it really with people that have a use for the product. So a proximity farm on the back of a sandwich producing company, that we could potentially put our equipment in that then feeds that product straight into that that supply, and that sort of proximity farm is what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I think it's something which is definitely worth considering, that once you become an expert in the field like you have, that there's another opportunity to capitalize on your learnings, to kind of sell your expertise. Because people look to you as, I'm sure that when you started growing underground, you didn't know this much about crop propagation as you know now. So, there are people who are just starting out in those sort of similar journeys who come to you as the expert and are desperate to learn more.
Yeah, no, there is. I mean, there's a lot of interest in this industry. As I said, it's an embryonic, industry at the start of its sort of its life in a way, and there's a lot of people that want to get into this space, and that's great. And there's definitely room for lots more people. And yeah, we've learned a heck of a lot over the last 5+ years of not just building a farm and selling produce, but actually the detail of the operations of it. What goes behind. We've got a system now that is all online, which does our yields, and it compares it to where it was grown within the farm, and it's a whole traceability system. It's takes into consideration our hygiene records and our forms that we fill out. I mean, on a daily basis, that could be anything from 20 to 30 forms. So all of that done online. That this is all compacted into a system that we can develop as we build as a farm. We'll use it for ourselves, for this site, for future sites. But also that's something potentially you can then put into a product and sell as a licensed product. So yeah, that's the future, something we could look at. But for now, we're concentrating on producing produce and selling produce. Yeah. There's a lot of the, even the companies in the States like AeroFarms, they've changed their model slightly, and a lot of people have changed their model, and certainly recently with the fact that they're becoming a technology supplier, and we feel that you've got to really prove it at commercial level, commercial scale first before you can do that. So what our plans are to do the technology piece and sell it, but it's got to be proved. And when I say proved, it's got to be proved at a commercial scale, not just on a small scale.
So the advice really is, do what you do really well before you choose to diversify. Don't some other opportunities can be distractions, but keeping your core to the best it can be is the most kind of critical piece of your business.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the whole reason everyone's getting into this is because of food production and feeding people. So that's what we've got to do. Yeah. So it's got to work at that level, and be proved at that level. So that's what we're doing.
Great. So we've got time for a couple more questions, and then I will let you go. But it's been incredible. So these are kind of pandemic related from Dishal and Subject, and it says, what kind of problems have you seen at the beginning and now during this pandemic, and sort of how do you solve it? How do you manage your business during the lockdown?
So
quite a nice place to be locked away underground, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, we continued through lockdown, and we lost a good 40% of our business in 1 week, due to all the restaurants closing. But luckily, we supply into the retail market, so we continued to supply. The government. I mean, we're a site where we when you come into the farm, you've got to put overalls on, hairnets, you wash your hands, you put on alcohol gel, it's high PPE, and it's so we have those sort of principles embedded in the business already. So we increased that obviously, and reduced the amount of people that are working in the office. Anyone that could work from home could work from home. But there was also an element as well that some people, it was changing every day, and we didn't know you're coming to work some days, and some people were ill or off, and we were saying, if you're slightly, you're ill, you can't come into work, so we don't want to affect the rest of the team. We put everyone into 2 teams, and then, some days people were coming in, there was hardly anyone in. And so what we did then is the management sort of decided to come in and work the shifts with the teams downstairs, as in some ways, it acts as solidarity. It wasn't fair that some people had to go in and some would work from home and be safe. But it was also, we were act as a backup, so we would go downstairs in the morning, help out getting produce out the door, and then come up and do our day jobs in the afternoon. And then if somebody didn't turn up to work, then we were there to sort of work the full shift and the full day. And it also makes you realise again how hard that work is, and hats off to our operations team who do this on a daily basis.
What makes a good leader is someone being able to understand what the roles within their company are, and it leads to happy employees and a happy business.
Yeah, I think it helps for them to see me in and other people, other managers in on a daily basis that could have potentially worked from home. So yeah, that was one thing. And then business has started back up with food service, and that's increasing, which is good. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a tough few months ahead until we get through to next summer, where hopefully we're through this then. But who knows? Yeah,
and we've got one question from Matthew before we wrap up, and sort of touched on this earlier, but he said, I read somewhere that you use recycled carpet as a medium. Is this correct? And can you expand on this? And that's Matthew from Minnesota.
Right, yeah. So we've got a substrate that we use, which comes from the offcuts of new carpet, and then they go back to a central distribution hub, and this company collects them, and they have a machine that rips it apart and reforms it as a capillary matting. It's used for underlay as well for carpet, underneath carpets, but they do that, and then they send it off, get it tested and check that everything's okay. They cut it to size for our requirement, and then it's shipped out to us. It's really soluble, so it holds water, and it works really well for some of the crops that we're growing. And then once we've used it and we finished it, and most crops we do single use of that, but some we can do double use, and that then goes into a skip, and it's collected and goes into southeast London, where it's incinerated, and then the energy produced from that goes into actually powering, creating electricity and powering London. So it's a circular. But there are other substrates that we're looking at and we're trialing. There's some that are compostable, that home compostable, which then you're into producing a lot of waste that can be composted, and which is a great thing, and that could go back out onto the land, and add towards that. If we've only got 40 harvests left due to soil degradation, then things like that are really going to help maintain nutrients in the soil.
Fantastic. So we're just running a bit over time, so I will wrap up, but I've got a couple more things for you. So Richard, you started with your balloon business when you were a young boy, and you've gone on to co-found Growing Underground and all the amazing things that you've done in between. But what's the advice that you give to sort of young entrepreneurs and people who are getting started on their business journey? Maybe having their first idea isn't working out, or they're looking to develop a new one. What's your sort of key advice?
Just like resilience, really, and just keep at it. If you believe in what you're doing, and you know that what you're doing is there's a future in a market, then go for it and just keep working at it, and you'll get problems thrown at you on a daily basis, and you just need to solve those as best you can. Sometimes you won't solve things, or you won't be able to solve them the way you want to. You just got to do your best. I always would say that decision making is really, really important, and you will sometimes make the wrong decision, but making a wrong decision is better than not making a decision at all. Yeah. And I think it's just that resilience, and even if you are doing something that potentially it may not work out, but if it doesn't work out, you just got to think all of that experience that I've learned from doing that, it's not wasted, because you just take that on to the next project or business that you're working on. I like a quote, and I was going to say it earlier and I didn't say it. Yeah. Is a Thomas Edison quote, which he said, I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. He was developing the light bulb. So I think that says it all. You just got to keep on pushing ahead.
Yeah. And what would your nightclub promoting, Ibiza frequenting self think of what you're doing now?
Oh wow. Yeah. I'm so glad that didn't work out, because the lifestyle is just not. I go to bed at 9 o'clock now, so I'm up at 7. I'm an early riser, so I don't know. I don't think I was really cut out for that in the first place. So.
Exactly. Well, Richard, thank you so much. You can find Growing Underground and all the social links were in the invitation, but we'll be sharing the webinar recording post live stream. Everyone who tuned in today will get a recording sent directly to them, so you can rewatch, refer, and find Growing Underground and what they're up to. And yeah, thank you so much, Richard. It's been really interesting, really valuable. And you do, in normal times, you do tours, don't you?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, so and hopefully once we're past COVID, we'll be up and running again with those. So yeah, we do public tours, we do corporate tours for people that come into London for their board meetings, and then they want a day out, so they'll come and have a tour of the tunnel, have a bit of inspiration, and go back to their board meetings. And so we do that for all sorts of organisations, and it's something we definitely would like to start back up in the when we're past this this pandemic.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. This is absolutely incredible. Really enjoyed it. Getting a lot of love in the chat box. So thank you, Richard, and thank you everyone for joining. Bye.